My marketing budget's always been zero because word of mouth has honestly built this company. Something had to change or this just wasn't going to work because it was hurting relationships in my life, whether it be family. I was 19 when I started this shop, and I just kept thinking, there has to be more to it than this.
Tyler Anderson is the owner and founder of Elite Truck and Auto, a nationally recognized technician and 2022 U.S. Auto Tech National Champion. He built his shop from the ground up and leads with a deep focus on quality, people, and long-term growth.
I think we find the most successful people are the ones that can truly embrace being who they need to be.
No, absolutely. I think people, and myself included, but you have to shift your mindset from not what do I have to do to reach these goals and become this level of shop or anything like that. It's who do I have to become? I also think, like you said, are you willing to pay the price of success? Everybody wants the view, but nobody wants the climb. That's not easy. And in my opinion, I'm not even anywhere close to the
Welcome to Beyond the Bay. I'm your host, Peter Cooper. And in this episode, we have special guest Tyler Anderson, owner and founder of Elite Truck and Auto out of Greenville, Ohio. Thanks for being on, Tyler.
Thank you for having me.
And so you have kind of an interesting history. You are, from what I've seen, the most technologically, certified person I've ever interviewed. Because my understanding is you won the U.S. Auto Tech National Championship in 2022.
That is correct. Yep.
What is that exactly? Give me a little background on what that competition is.
Basically, it's obviously a national competition. They have X amount of rounds to get qualified for it, to even be on like the finals, like I was there. They have you take like a written knowledge test, if you will. Then whenever I did it, I don't know if they're still doing it this way, but there was like an in-person qualifying you had to do as well, and went through all that. And that was more based on like a time trial, but also like quality of work, making sure you're doing all the correct steps, torquing all your fasteners, and just doing things the right way, but efficient as possible, if you will. Then if you made it through the first two rounds, then they flew you down to Miami, I think is where it was, for my year there, and fly you down there for the finals, and you go through a couple more steps there. But it was definitely a great experience, a lot of fun. I met a lot of cool people. Some of the people that I met there, I still talk today. You meet a lot of people down there, other shop owners, other technicians, and it was definitely great just to talk with everybody and definitely learn some things about business in general, at this competition. So.
Well, and speaking of business, so tell me a little bit about your operation. My understanding is that you specialize in light and medium duty trucks. And so tell me a little bit about your operation, how many bays do you have, how many technicians, kind of your history.
Yeah. Started in 2016, the year after I got out of high school. We have 7 bays here, 4,500 square foot under roof. 7 bays, including an alignment bay there. 5 techs as of right now with 2 service riders and then myself. And we do specialize in diesels, light to medium duty, but also we, still do the cars, trucks, SUVs, you name it. I tell all of our customers, if it'll fit in the shop, we can do it. The only thing I tell people, we don't do is body work. We're not trying to get into painting or anything like that, but from oil changes, tires, alignments to, engine replacements, you name it, we've done it, and do a lot of it, to be honest with you.
So that's kind of an interesting story. You started incredibly young, going from basically right out of high school. What would you say one of your biggest hurdles were doing that?
I would say starting so young, if I'm being honest, would be maturity. I was 19 when I started this shop, and at 19, you think you know everything, but you're not even close. So the biggest hurdle was, when I started, I just knew I loved to work on cars, but I knew, I had some mentors and everything, but knew next to nothing about business when it came down to it. And what the process, the workflow, all of that should look like to even begin with. So I didn't really have anybody to base anything off of, I just went off of, research and what I thought was right, and really just try to take care of people, I guess would be my main thing there, and just provide the most value, the best service, to the best of your ability, really.
So how were you able to, we talked about this in the pre-interview, but how were you able to make that shift from being a technician to a business owner? Like, what was that path like for you?
Honestly, it was a very rough one, and it took me way too long to learn that, to take off that tech hat and put on the owner hat, if you will. If I'm being honest, it really came down to I got to a breaking point here a couple years ago. It's probably 5 years ago now. But I got to a breaking point where I was getting pulled in too many directions. I was the service writer, I was answering all the phone calls, I was still the lead tech, and there was just too many hats being worn for how much, how much our car count was and how much work we were doing. To where I actually sat in a good friend of mine's office one day, and I just told him, I'm like, dude, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I got this job offer that was very good at the time. I was really thinking about just saying, throwing in the towel and being done with it. But I'm also a absolute terrible employee. That the thought of that, I guess, would makes my skin crawl. But like I said, just got to a breaking point there, and it was either something had to change or this just wasn't going to work because it was hurting relationships in my life, whether it be family, what is now my wife. I was working 80, 100-hour weeks, and it wasn't sustainable. And I just kept thinking, there has to be more to it than this. It has to get better than this. And so making that mental shift there was, I would say, hiring the right people, putting the right people in the right places, and honestly getting out of the way. And then also getting over the mental roadblock of, when your techs are working, everybody in the shop's working, doing something, to work on the business, not in the business. And the mental roadblock for me there was always feeling like I had to be doing something. So if I was doing, some office work, I'm like, man, I need to be wrenching. But it was just kind of like had to chain myself to my desk at times to truly work on the business and not in it.
Right. And I think that's honestly, a lot of shop owners feel like that they're experiencing this in isolation. And I think almost every shop owner that's had any level of success has a very similar path. I went through it and I started my own shop. And I was sitting in my office one morning. I actually remember the moment I had this aha moment. It's about 5 o'clock in the morning, and I was sitting in my office doing paperwork because that was the only time I could get things done, like pay bills, do payroll, things like that. And I just kept thinking to myself, there has got to be a better way. Like, there is no way that this is sustainable for me to do everything. And then you also realize, and I've seen this now working with all the shops that I work with and working with owners, is that shops kind of get to this plateau, and it really depends. What the dollar amount really depends on the owner and what they're physically and mentally capable of. But it's anywhere between 3 and 5 million we see in shops. And they hit this plateau, and owners that can't adopt the mindset that you have of, I'm not going to be involved in everything, I'm not going to try to micromanage everything, they are the ones who actually break past that ceiling. But the ones who never get out of that always stay under that level because they think they have to touch everything and do everything. And one of the downsides of that I warn people on is that you're teaching your people a learned behavior of, it's not my problem to fix because he's always going to come in and do it for me. Meaning they won't own that responsibility. They won't own that problem, and they won't have a solution to it because the owner always comes in and saves the day. And the really bad thing about that is it actually starts to demoralize your people because they don't get that chemical, the endorphin rush that you get from winning. It's what I call, you're stealing their wins. So that's a huge thing that you've been able to recognize that.
Absolutely. And I've noticed even in my own, staff here that once I took a step back, their confidence increases now because instead of, like you said, me coming in, saving the day or, solving that problem for them, they don't learn anything from that. Then I've literally watched it on my guy's face and they're like, hey, I'm having issues with this. And I go over there and do it in 2 seconds. It almost like, takes it out of them. Like it steals their confidence, steals their win. I completely agree with that. To where now we've changed that a little bit. You see the confidence start to come back and, the mindset of, I can figure this out on my own. And, that they chase after that win, if you will.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing I think you see, and kind of to build on your point, is that when you sweep in and save the day, sometimes they feel like they're dumb because they're like, well, if it was that easy to solve the problem, why didn't I? And that's a tip I would give owners, that if you do have to intervene, because eventually you do, you can't let a kid sit there and struggle with, a lug nut and not realizing it's left-handed threads all day. You got to kind of remind the guys that I only know this because I've made that mistake and I've got 20 years experience. And these are all part of the learning process. Like, you really have to handle when you do, because eventually, like I said, you always have to come in at some point. You have to be careful how you handle it.
Correct. Absolutely. And learning to handle it the correct way has been a struggle of mine personally. When to step in, when not to. And just ultimately, you have to trust your people, trust people you've put in place, that their training is on point and that they know, what to do in certain situations for sure.
Well, and that's, I think, a big point of, you know, owners need to build structure and they need to build some policies and procedures because you need to build a framework so that your people know how to solve problems. And that's why I tell people it's so important to have core values. And they think it's kind of fluff and it's like it doesn't matter. And it's like, here's why it matters. When you establish your core values, you can't make a policy and procedure for everything that's always going to happen. It's just not possible. And you really don't want to waste your time doing that, anyways. But if you have really good core values and people understand them, you can go to your people and say, look, there's going to be a day that you're going to have to make a judgment call. And as long as you make a judgment call within these guidelines that we've set forth, we're going to back you up. Like, even if it turns out bad, hey, that's okay. And I think that alone gives people a huge amount of confidence to solve problems on their own.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's something I tell my guys as well is like, you know, I trust you based off your judgment. And if something goes wrong, it's not going to come back on you. You know what I mean? I want them to learn and grow and make their own judgment calls and, build that confidence, build that skill set to where moving forward in the future, they're ready to go.
Right. Yeah, and that's how you build good employees too. It's because they continue to win, and it builds that confidence, and now they have, that track record of solving problems. They believe in themselves. Kind of going along with that theme and what we talked about a little bit earlier. You and I talked about this too in the pre-interview about owners calculating their value and really trying to look at tasks and what tasks should I do and what shouldn't I do. Going through this path of learning how to run a business that you've gone through, what would you say was the first thing that you took off your plate and learned to delegate, and how did you come to that?
Well, the first thing for me, and I'm not saying I even did it the right way, to be honest with you, but was I hired, two techs and, or hired techs first there. And I was still, like I said, that's when I was still wearing all the hats. But once I finally, put a monetary dollar amount to my time and decided that, I need to, like I told you, something has to change and we got to start off on a new process here. Really just hire your weaknesses. If there's guys out there still, doing your own payroll and doing your own basic accounting and stuff, that's something I would definitely, find a good accountant, and keyword, find a good accountant, because I've been there, done
Right.
that. But get that off your plate, get those mundane tasks. That's not your lane. You're here to work on cars, run a business, not do payroll, or accounting, if you will. So that's one thing I definitely hired out. And then one of the biggest steps I took was in the very beginning, my face was the face of the company. So everybody that called in, they want to talk Tyler. They want to talk Tyler. And once I delegated to the service writer position and kind of broke that trend to where everybody was asking for me, that was night and day huge for me. Had rumors out there that, I sold the shop and all this other stuff. But once I got a service writer up front to where I could actually focus on what I should be doing and not answering the phone calls, what was huge for me. And then also I would say a key thing that I see that I've heard of some shops that just don't seem to do is delegating their techs to their lane, if you will. I feel like every tech has their lane of what they're good at, what they enjoy doing, and what gets them excited to come in every day. I have the best team. I could not be more proud of my guys. But I have one guy that's really good at heavy line work, head gaskets, timing jobs, stuff like that. And he's my main heavy line guy that does all that kind of work. I got another guy that doesn't like the diesel as much, but he's really good at imports. I got another guy that absolutely loves the diesels, and that's all he wants to do is diesel engine work. So just delegating each tech to their lane on what they're good at and sharpening those strengths instead of trying to make them good at something they don't enjoy. You're not going to get better at something you don't enjoy doing. There's not going to be the motivation there. So that was definitely eye-opening for me and has helped me out tremendously, is, putting all my techs in their lane as long as, workload allows it, and let them build off of that skill set. But I would also say too, when it comes to hiring as well, like, hire the person, not the skill set. Yes, you want that tech, that service writer to have skills, but hire the person first, because they can be an A tech and be the worst employee you've ever had and cause all sorts of issues. Thankfully, I haven't had to experience that a whole lot, but I've just heard so many horror stories. And to be honest with you, both of my service writers that are here with me currently are absolute great at what they do, but they were never service writers before. They were customers that turned into employees.
Well, and I think that's a huge point, and I want to expand on that. And that is, so many shops hire out of desperation.
Yep.
They wait until they're desperate. They wait until they're in a crisis. And then all of a sudden they wake up and say, oh my God, we got to hire a tech. And so they go through the whole process, interview, and then they hire the first candidate based on the technical skill that guy possesses today. And they completely ignore the fact, does this person fit your culture? Are they going to be on the bus, is what I call it? Are you putting them in the right seat on the bus? Meaning, are they doing the thing that they're naturally inclined to do? Or is that guy just desperate too, wants a job, and you're offering a job, and he's going to basically do the song and dance? And then later on, you're going to find out this guy probably didn't fit. And I think that's a huge area we all fall into because so many owners don't focus on labor funnel, is what I call it. A lot of owners have figured this out and they do advertising and they go out and spend a lot of time and energy on a customer funnel, to bring in work. But we don't think about labor as a funnel that way, even though it is. And so people wait until they're desperate and then they wind up and spend all this money on Indeed. And they really, you should never stop hiring ever. I mean, I did this. So I've owned other businesses and I owned a transportation company and I would have people randomly come in, a friend of a friend or somebody and want to know if I was looking for a driver. And I'm like, I always have room for a good driver. Always. Like, I'm never going to say no to that because, I hate to say this, but owners have to understand that your obligation is to the business first. Like, I'm not saying don't be a good boss, but if you have an opportunity to hire a great person and you have people that are underperforming and then you're on the fence about, well, I don't know if I can hire this guy, sometimes it's natural selection. Sometimes that person that doesn't fit may have to drop off. But don't ever close the door to hiring.
No, absolutely. Even when we're quote unquote not hiring, I still people drop off resumes and stuff like that all the time. And that's something that I 100% agree with. And that's another thing I feel like in business, you hear some shop owners or business owners in general say, "Oh, my staff is my family." I don't like that analogy personally because we're a team. We're not a family. We're a team, and you can get cut from a team if you're not performing. It's no different than if I'm a terrible business owner and don't treat people the right way and everything else. Guess what? I'm not going to have a business before too long. So I look at it more of like it's a team that you can get cut from, or you can get moved to, QB1, if you will, if you want a sports analogy there. But like it's all about, finding the right people and also keeping them too and treating them the best you can. Because also my personal opinion is, take care of your people and they'll take care of your customers. I can't take care of all my customers, but if my techs are happy and my employees are happy, they're trained up properly and everything, they're going to take care of my customers for me. And then now my focus is taking care of my team.
Yeah, and what you said too is a valid point. Owners need to stop using the word family. That's become this catchphrase lately. And it's actually a red flag for a lot of people, especially younger generation, because what that means to them, and they've seen this over and over again in business, what that means to them is you're going to abuse me. You're going to work me like a random mule. You're not going to pay me what I'm worth. Like, these are what these people are hearing. And I think a lot of owners need to get out of their own head sometimes and say, what is that person experiencing when they come into your shop? If you're using trigger words like family and stuff like that, you better be able to back it up in a way more than just saying we pay good. Like, here's an example of that. When I ran my shop, my mom had a house across the street. And I did use the word we were like family. And then I explained to them that we go to grandma's house 3 days a week for lunch. Like, I actually had a way to demonstrate that we were family more than just saying the words. Because if you say the words and don't have things to back it up, people aren't going to believe you.
I've heard you say before too that you're interviewing the tech just as much. People don't realize that the tech is also interviewing you, especially with where the industry is it's not just whether you want to hire them, it's whether they want to come work for you and your company. And that's something I've very much taken to heart and tried to, I guess, provide the best possible facility and work environment that I can, because it's just as much them deciding they want to come work for you as it is the other way around. And I also think that's very important. I think there's too many, I guess, old school, if you will, employers or shop owners out there that are, I'm giving you a paycheck and you're going to do what I say. And and that's just not how it is. Especially in my case. And maybe that's just because I'm from the younger generation, but I think the days of, someone staying somewhere 40 years and, starting and retiring out of the same company out of principle is over. If people aren't being treated properly or being taken care of, they're going to leave. I wholeheartedly believe that.
Yeah, and I think that's something that every shop owner, and I pose this question to every shop owner I talk to, whether I coach them or if I just talk to them, and that's, why would someone want to work for you? I'm in Des Moines, and the 3 of the 4 largest dealership groups have just built new facilities, and every single one of them is air conditioned. That is something that 10 years ago everybody would think was a fantasy, but now it's a reality. And you see it even on the internet. I see some videos of some of these car dealerships. And there was one the other day, and I don't know where they were at, but they were talking about the dealership spent $500,000 to air condition the shop because they knew if they did not do that, they would not be able to hire good techs. And it's crazy out there when shop owners don't even think that way. Like, there's nothing in their brain conceptually that's like, whoa, I don't know why someone want to work here. I know that's a problem, guys.
No, absolutely. And our facility is air conditioned, and we're actually haven't made this public yet, but I guess it will now as we're expanding onto our existing building from 4,500 square foot to where we'll be 12,000 square foot under roof here. The crew's actually back there excavating right now as we speak. But even in that new facility, a couple of my techs that know that they're going to be back in that new portion of the shop, they're like, is it going to be air conditioned? Absolutely. I'm not going to have, half my facility be air conditioned for the guys in the front shop, but the back shop's going to be hung out to dry. And I think that's more important than people realize is, the air conditioning, the amenities, if you will, and stuff like that. Like my guys have a tool allowance and just little things like that to take care of them. I even offer them like a clothing credit, if you will, to buy work boots and things of that nature to where I give them a certain amount of funds that are dedicated to certain things, whether it be, the work boots, the tools, and just to take care of them that much more. Cause I think that's another thing in our industry. That's just how it is, but I'm trying to do something about it is there's not many other spaces that you go to work in an industry and have to, for instance, I know I'm getting off on a different topic here, but provide your own tools. So I try to give them
Right.
a tool credit. You give them a wage to live off of when it's like, hey, out of that wage, you need to spend thousands of dollars to work here. So, I've had guys in the past where I've set them up to where, hey, here's a toolbox to get you started, has all the basic hand tools any you need. And then the last one I did this with, he made it, decided I was going to keep him and, made it past the 90 days and everything else. And I ended up just giving him that toolbox. Those are his tools now, and he can build off of that. So I think that's something else that shop owners should be thinking about as well.
And I think they should. And that I did a very similar thing. So when we would hire what we called a lube tech, so an entry level person that they really didn't have, even if they had tools, they didn't have enough to do. Because heavy duty world sucks, because you got to have, at least in the automotive world, you only need metric tools. But in heavy duty, you still have to have metric and standard. You got to have two sets.
Correct.
But so we put together a toolbox. I think I had like $2,000 in them when it's done.
Yep.
And we made an agreement with them that if they stayed a year, that whole toolbox was theirs. And that was a pretty big deal. I mean, that was a selling point for us because we would say, look, we believe in you enough that as long as you prove yourself, we're going to give you the starter set of tools. And to go along also with what you're saying, I think a lot of shop owners that keep saying, I can't hire good techs, need to look at themselves and say, what are you doing to invest in your people? Like, if you don't offer health insurance and you don't offer some of these ancillary programs like tool allowances or good uniforms and things like that, you're losing so much money. You have to look at it like an investment. I think a lot of shop owners need to understand that, if you have a well-run shop that's charging a competitive labor rate, you can theoretically bill about $10,000 a week per tech pretty easily. Like, it's not hard to do that. And so if you can't offer certain things, you have to look at it as if you've got enough work, you're losing $10,000 a week because you don't offer an environment where anybody wants to work.
Correct. And I think that also goes back to not only, like you said, those other fine details, amenities, but what's your facility look like? Does it, is it a mess? Or the floor's all dirty? Is nothing organized? You're not, in my opinion, you're not going to get a good tech to want to even come in and work there if they walk into your shop and, all the equipment's outdated as all get out. Nothing, half the stuff doesn't even work. All the tools are a mess. Nothing's organized. Me personally, I'm extremely OCD with cleanliness and just having everything organized. Everything has a place and just trying to make things efficient as possible. We actually here, give you a little fun fact here. About a year ago, I bought a ride-on like floor cleaner, and the company that dropped it off, the guy kind of looked puzzled. He goes, usually we sell these to big, factories or warehouses. And he's like, this is probably the smallest, place I've dropped one off to. And I just basically told him, I care about what this shop looks like because I believe in what the facility looks like is the product you're going to get. And also on a completely unrelated note, that will also pay for itself in a year with them, instead of them, scrubbing the floor with the brushes and everything else, they can hop on, we call it the Zamboni, and clean the floor in 5 minutes and, pull in another vehicle and get right back to work. And they got a clean workspace and they're ready to go again. But I think that also plays a role into it too. What does your facility look like? And what kind of cars are you, or what
Right.
kind of vehicles are you working on too? Is it nothing but, old rusty junk that you're working on that's, a pain in the butt to get apart and everything's, we got rust here, and, or, what's your lot look like as well? So,
Yeah, and I think that's a good point too, and I bring this up a lot. If you have a dirty, dim lit shop, you're going to attract dirty, dim mechanics. People are attracted to what they're used to what's normal. And it's unbelievable how much it will change your business just by cleaning it up. And a lot of guys will say, I don't have time for that. You have time for whatever you make a priority of. And you have to make it a priority because you're a professional organization. Plus, you have to understand when you have a shop that's dirty, disorganized, you're attracting that type of clientele too. I don't know of anybody that would buy a $100,000 plus sports car that's going to take that car to the fly by night shop around the street that's got hand painted sign and the floor looks like it hasn't been mopped in 10 years. Like I wouldn't take my car to that place.
correct.
And you have to understand that. And it's not an overnight thing. If you think you have a bad image, you can clean it up little by little, but every little bit is going to help your employees respect the building more, and you're going to be able to attract better people.
Absolutely. 100% agree. And that's what we've tried to model off of is, attract the kind of clientele with how the facility looks and how we operate it and everything that goes on there.
So tell me, I mean, you've done some pretty amazing things. I'll be honest. To being able to start, a shop at that age, roughly, what were you, like 19
Yeah.
at the time?
19 going on 20.
That's a pretty amazing thing. And you've gone through a lot. What are you currently struggling with? Like, do you have any current hurdles that are really difficult for you in this industry?
I would say it's not as much the industry as far as more personally. I'm a very motivated person, and I would say something I struggle with honestly all the time would be wanting to reach my full potential, if you will, or my max capacity, while still being present at home with my family and not losing focus on what's truly important. I have a real bad case of tunnel vision. If I set my mind to something, set a goal, I get tunnel vision and I'm all in on it. But I would say right now for me, it's just not losing focus on what's important. God, family, friends, in that order, and keep everything rolling, keep everything moving. But still, I hate the term work-life balance, but maintain a certain form of balance there, if you will.
I think balance is important. Business owners have a very unique type of mindset that isn't shared by the rest of the world. People have to understand that being an entrepreneur is a thing that is very risky. You have to have a risk type of personality, and you have to be pretty confident in yourself to be able to do these things that we do, to take these risks. And so you really have to be careful of that tunnel vision. And I went through it. I've done through it many different times in the many different businesses I've owned. At one point, I went out and bought a crew cab service truck because that was the only way I ever saw my kids, is if they came with me. And at that point, it should have been a warning signal to me that there was a problem. It really wasn't. I was a little dense. Sometimes it takes us a lot of learning lessons, but I was trying to build something, and I did. I built a fairly successful shop in a handful of years, from a gravel parking lot to a multi-million-dollar operation. But it does come at a cost, and I think we all need to ask ourselves, what is it costing us to be successful, and do we really think it's worth it? And that's one of those lessons where, if you look back and the answer is well, no. There's help out there to help you change your ways. There's mentors, there's top 20 groups. I think I encourage every shop owner to either be in some kind of business owner group, chamber of commerce, if that's the easiest thing for you to do, something where you surround yourself with other successful people, because they are full of these great ideas that they've already solved these problems. That's one of the things I teach my children. Really, smart people learn from their mistakes. Really smart people learn from other people's mistakes. You don't have to go through it alone. And I think a lot of shop owners just think they're on this island by themselves. And it's like, there are other shop owners that have struggled. They've gone through this, and they have really easy solutions to some of these problems.
No, absolutely. And that I completely agree with that, because I think the entrepreneurship in itself is very lonely, if you will. You always feel like you're on an island, and that's something I've honestly just now started getting into is, either a 20 group or getting other guys around you that you can bounce ideas off of and problems, and, go through solutions and see, hey, what worked for you guys? And seeing, instead of making the problem so much harder and trying to do everything yourself, rely on other people who have already been there. But yeah, it's something that a lot of people don't understand if you're not in it, of, what it's like, and there's no real way to put it into words either. But I also think, like you said, are you willing to pay the price of success? Everybody wants the view, but nobody wants the climb. It's not easy, and in my opinion, I'm not even anywhere close to the top where I want to be yet. But it's a climb, and there's a cost there, and you have to be, if you want to be, for instance, in our industry, and a shop owner, you better be willing to pay that price and make sure you're in the business for the right reasons. I think some guys either go into business because they don't like where they're working at and they're just going to do it themselves. Well, if that's the case, change your environment. Or, I've heard of other guys that are just in it for the money. Well, if that's your main motivator, I can about guarantee you're not going to make it. If that's all you're chasing, you know what I mean? That's not going to happen.
Yeah, and that's one of those questions that every shop owner needs to ask themselves is why. If you don't have a why, you're going to have a really hard time getting through the tough times. Like, what is getting you out of bed when you don't know if you can make payroll this week? You don't know if you're going to be able to make your payments this week. And that's the kind of stuff that keeps you from quitting, because we all go through that. We all go through cash flow crunches. I've had customers. I had one of my biggest customers went bankrupt, left us with this huge bill. I mean, eventually we got paid, but it was rough for a while. And people don't understand what motivates them. They have a hard time answering the why. And honestly, you need to have an answer to the why, because you need to be the one out there selling that vision to the employees. My vision was that we didn't shy away from the tough stuff. I really, really got motivated when someone would bring me something that had already been to 2 or 3 other shops and they couldn't figure it out. And those were the kind of jobs that made a name for us. And we weren't afraid to take on the hard jobs. And those are the kind of things that you can build into core values and how you want to model the business. And it is your business. Owners out there have to understand it is your business. It's okay for you to want to run it the way you want to run it. But to build on your point about that, if you're mad at your employer and you're going to quit and go somewhere else, and that's the only reason why you're doing it, I'm going to tell everybody right now, you just created one of the worst bosses in town, because you're going to be a horrible boss.
Yep.
And people make this mistake. They get stuck in this cycle of, I don't like where I'm at, I'm just going to go do my own thing. And that's fine that you do that. That is one of the motivators that most of us, we have that at least a little bit. But you got to understand that if you don't know how to run a business, you're just going to be a really bad boss.
And I personally think I was, for the first couple of years, like I said, starting at the age I did, I knew nothing. And so there was no structure, there was no processes, everything, every day was a wild card on what it was going to turn into. But yeah, it's, be in it for the right reasons, and, make sure you're treating people the right way. And that's something I guess I've always kind of prided myself on, is we've never really advertised a whole lot. My marketing budget's always pretty much been zero, because word of mouth has honestly built this company to what it is today. But that's back to the core values of provide value and care for people. I mean, care for your customer and they'll take care of you forever. So
Yeah, and I will absolutely need to, get people to really understand that customer service is not an accident. You either have a culture where you care about your employees and your customers, or you don't. And everyone has a culture, whether it's by accident or not. So really got to evaluate what is your culture. And one of the things I did young and dumb, because I started my first business when I was 21, and I didn't know what I didn't know. And I was a good mechanic, but I didn't know anything about running a business. And I one time told an employee that if he needed a tickle and a hug, he was working in the wrong place. Needless to say, that guy didn't stay very long.
right.
And the point about that is so many owners that start shops, I mean, let's just face this, we're already men, so we inherently don't care about people as much as we care about stuff. That's just ingrained in our brain. The second thing we got going against this is that we're all mechanics. It's different in different industries, different small businesses, because you have different mentalities. If you're in banking or executive world, you've gone through all these things. But as mechanics, we don't ever receive management training, what they call soft skills type of stuff. And that's something that, man, those are some painful lessons when you figure that out, that your soft skills are not so good.
Absolutely. And that's another thing here just recently, I'd say within the past year, that I'm really trying to hone in and learn, because it got brought to my attention that I did not have the skills, to say the least. So I'm a very, self-motivated, if you will, person, that I don't need to be told a good job or anything like that. Like, just point me in a direction and turn me loose. Well, got brought to my attention that I was not telling my employees that they were doing good or bad or indifferent. There was just a lack of feedback there. So that's something that I personally have been working on, and giving them feedback and telling them how they're doing, if you will.
Yeah, and I did the same thing. I was really bad about giving negative feedback, but I was not so good about giving positive feedback. And you really have to force yourself into being someone different. I think that's another thing that people don't understand when they start a business. To be successful in business, you kind of have to be like a chameleon from the standpoint you have to force yourself to be the person you need to be, whether that's who you are naturally or not. Like I'm naturally an introvert, and now I'm doing things like podcasts and public speaking. That was not what I went to school to do. I did not go to school to run business. I went to school to be a diesel mechanic. And we all have to evolve. And I think we find the most successful people are the ones that can truly embrace being who they need to be.
No, absolutely. And I think that also comes back to, people set goals, whether it's monetary goals as far as money or just the size of the company or whatever it is. I think people, and myself included, but you have to shift your mindset from not what do I have to do to reach these goals and become this level of shop or anything like that. It's who do I have to become to reach that level? Because it's not about as much, the roadblock isn't typically what you have to do. It's who you have to become. You have to become a different version of yourself to take that next step and go to that next level, in my opinion. Because there wasn't, 5 years ago, let's say, that version of me wasn't, it wasn't that I wasn't doing the right things, if you say. It's more of who I had to become and change, like you said, to adapt to get to that next step.
Right. And we all change through our lives. It's just part of aging and maturing. And I think people need to understand that you can absolutely mature into the person that you want to be as long as you actively know what that is.
Yeah.
And you really, and all that comes down to like anything, it's recognizing that you need to change. And it's the same way with reaching out and getting help when you run a business. If you can't admit that there's a problem, you're never going to fix the problem. And that was one of the hard things for me is I, it really was a heartening thing to me. It was like this realization that I realized I was the problem. Like I realized I was everything great about my business, but I was also everything wrong with it because I had become this linchpin. I was the thing limiting the growth of the business because I couldn't get out of my own way because I thought I had to be involved in everything.
100% correct. I am the exact same way. Couldn't agree more.
And sometimes, honestly, and this is a crazy turn on things. So when I ran my first business, my transportation business, I realized that I did not have the soft skills. I did not want to do that, and I wasn't ready to be that person. So I got out of my own way and just went and hired an office manager. And I hired her. She was great at what she did. I said, you run that side of it. I'm going back into the shop because I wasn't ready to be that person. I wasn't ready to be in the office. And I think that that was probably my life-changing moment when I realized you don't have to do what you don't want to do. And I tell owners, if you find yourself constantly procrastinating, if you never want to sit down and do payroll, if you never want to sit down and write bills, then don't. You don't have to. You can hire people to do that. And you know what the crazy thing is? There are people out there in the world that is their favorite thing to do. They're called accountants. They love to sit down and write checks and play with numbers all day. And so if you don't, you have to understand the basics enough to be able to run the business. But I did the same thing. I had a bookkeeper. I didn't want to do the accounting all day, every day. I hired somebody to do that.
Yeah, I think if you're procrastinating all the time, that's your brain or body's way of telling you you're doing the wrong thing. You know, you don't procrastinate on things you love to do or enjoy doing and that you're good at doing. So I think that hits the nail right on the head of, hire your weakness or hire what you don't want to do. Unfortunately for us business owners is that list is never ending, and there's always going to be, you're at the end of the day, you're still the last line of defense. But for the majority, you can definitely hire that out and delegate that task, if you will.
Absolutely. And actually, to build on what you said, there's an amazing business coach called Dan Sullivan. And he's wrote a lot of books, and he's one of the original business coach in our generation. And he says the exact same thing. He says, I think his quote is, "Procrastination is your brain's way of telling you it's not your thing to do." And it really is a powerful tool. If you use that correctly, it's not hard to offload some of these tasks. So, and I really kind of want to recap what we've talked about. That's kind of like what you talked about, what you've done is, you look at all the tasks that you're doing all day. And one of the easiest ways to go down this path is just shed that first thing that you don't want to do anymore and just keep going down that path. And I think that's the other, to build on something Dan Sullivan said. He actually wrote a book about this called Who Not How, is start asking yourself who who's going to do it for you? Like if you decide, for example, you want to start marketing your shop, it's crazy to go out and spend all this time trying to learn how to use Google ads and Facebook ads and all. Just there's hundreds of agencies out there you can hire that'll do it for you. And yes, it costs a little bit of money, but if you know what your time is worth, you know that learning that skill is going to cost you 50, 60, $100,000 to learn it because you could be out doing important things like building new relationships with big fleets.
Absolutely. No, 100% correct. To stay the way put that to myself is stay in your lane. Now, I'm not an advertiser. I'm not a marketer. I'm not a big fan of social media. I stay in my lane and hire that stuff done. But I think there's also some business owners and general shop owners that they try to hang on to every little dollar they can, which ends up just costing you, money in the long run. You're sitting there trying to hold on to the $10 bill you got in your hand in front of you, and it's costing you the 20 that's in your back pocket. So I think that's very important for guys to realize, what is your time worth and stay on that track.
Absolutely. Well, Tyler, I want to thank you for being on today. We covered some really good topics about delegation and time management, and I really appreciate you being on today. And thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. Great talk.